Hi everyone, welcome back to Terror at Twilight with Miss Cheryl. Tonight's reading is Green Thumbs by Roberta Simpson Brown. All Gary Green wanted was to be left alone so he could finish his experiment and leave this town. Obviously, people here watch too many movies about mad scientists. Every kid in the neighborhood had snuck by to try and see what he was doing, and all the adults who fancied they had a green thumb had given him advice about his flower garden. Something had to be done. His project was top secret, and he had to have his privacy. His superiors had anticipated problems with nosy neighbors when they had made the decision to conduct the experiments in a small town. They hadn't realized there would be so many children to deal with. Gary had chased the Collins kids and the Kimball kids out of his yard for what seemed like the millionth time that day. Their mothers never checked to see what they were doing. Didn't they know that you couldn't be too careful? Bad things happened, even to good neighborhoods. He ought to know. He had a few close calls himself. He thought sometimes that the mothers wanted their children to play in his yard so they'd trample his flowers instead of their own. Maybe they were a little jealous. None of them had green thumbs like his. His yard really was the most beautiful one on the block. The grass on his lawn was greener and thicker, and the flower beds held exotic flowers of brilliant colors. He'd been using the formula with the new ingredient he added at the place he lived before coming here. He was running out of the first batch, but he wondered if he dared make another one so soon. Obtaining this special ingredient was always risky. He'd had one of those close calls that last time he did it. He seemed to be on to something, though, and his deadline was approaching. He needed to work as quickly as possible, but how could he concentrate with all those loud, pesky children running around his windows? At first he had asked them politely to stay off his property. They had ignored his request. His next step was to speak to the parents. This had immediately decreased his popularity on the street. Although support had been promised, little had been given. When the kids realized that no punishment would be forthcoming at home, they began to run through his yard on a regular basis. Each time Gary Green would have to chase them out himself. The last time he chased the Kimball children, Mrs. Kimball had heard him and had come pounding on his door. "Mr. Green," she yelled at him, "I'll thank you not to get after my kids any more. If they are doing something they shouldn't, you come and let me know, and I'll take care of it." "My dear lady," said Gary, "I have already informed you of their misconduct. I can't keep you constantly posted about your children's whereabouts and activities. I merely want them out of my yard because solitude is necessary for my work." "Work," she said. "What work? All I ever have seen you do is piddle around with those flowers. Maybe you ought to spend some time with little children. Then you might see them in a different light." Gary Green looked at her thoughtfully and came to a decision. Then he smiled, this most charming smile. "Mrs. Kimball, you may be right. You have given me an idea. Perhaps I will invite the children in to help me with my experiment. I've never used anyone so young before, but they could become part of my project." Gary Green's sudden change in attitude left Mrs. Kimball at a momentary loss for words. "Well, good," was all she could finally think to say. Thank you for coming over, Mrs. Kimball," said Gary. Mrs. Kimball turned, backed up a couple of steps, and hurried across to her own house. Gary closed the door quickly and went back to set up the lab for the children. He didn't like this new development, but he couldn't afford to call attention to himself by quarreling with the neighbors. He would have to move faster than he had planned. He was the only one who had progressed this far with the research, and he had to succeed. Too many were depending on him for positive results. His own life would eventually depend on his findings. Gary Green was working on a fertilizer that could speed up food production for millions of people who were starving. There were similar experiments in progress all across the county, but his combinations were the best so far. He'd been very daring to try this one special ingredient, but adding it had been the single thing that had made the flowers from back home grow. Now he was ready to try again. If it worked this time, he would report it to his superiors and they would begin production on a mass scale. The potential was good here. Supplies were plentiful. When this hit the market, hunger would be wiped out. He was ready for the children when he heard their voices in the yard again. The Collins kids and the Kimball kids were back. He opened the door and called, "Children!" They heard him and started to scatter their own words. "No, wait," he called. "Don't go." They stopped and looked at him, puzzled at the change. Something was fishy here. "Would you like to come inside and help me with my project?" he asked. "Are you talking to us?" one of the Collins kids asked. "Yes," he said, "really, I could use you. It was Mrs. Kimball's idea. You can check with her if you like." They were all undecided. "Of course, I'll understand if you're afraid," he said. "We're not afraid," they answered him. He held the door open and they all filed in. Once inside, they were curious about what they would be doing. "Can we see your lab?" they asked. "Just follow me," he told them. He led the children to his lab in the center of the house. He pushed a button and a door slid open. The children saw the room filled with equipment they had never seen before. "That special compartment in the middle of my lab is what I use for my experiments," he explained. "I am making fertilizer that will grow plants for food." For once, we're all quiet at the same time. It was like the set of a science fiction movie. The curiosity had led them to the special compartment. They looked at him for permission to look inside. "You may all go inside at once," he said. "It's big enough for all of you. Look around while I enter some data in my computer." The children stepped inside, amazed at the panel of buttons and blinking lights. Then the door slid quietly closed behind them and locked. "This was easier than I expected," thought Gary. Gary ignored the frightened faces and the frantic beating on the sealed windows. He was glad the compartment was soundproof. These children would make much more noise than the adults he had used before. Gary Green removed the flesh-colored glove from his right hand and pushed one button. Rays shot through the compartment, leaving him with an ample supply of the ingredients he needed for his tests. He took one last look around the place where he had been so successful, then his green fingers and 4 green thumbs entered the code that would signal the mothership and come and take him home. The end. Okay, thank you for joining me for this short story tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. See you again. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for another Terror at Twilight. Tonight's story is going to be Clack the Rattlebag by Neil Gaiman, out of his collection Trigger Warning. Clack the Rattlebag. Before you take me up to bed, will you tell me a story? Do you actually need me to take you up to bed? I asked the boy. He thought for a moment, then with intense seriousness, yes, actually, I think I do. It's because I've finished my homework and so it's my bedtime, and I am a bit scared. Not very scared, just a little bit. But it's a very big house and it's very dark and the lights don't always work. I reached over and tousled his hair. I can understand that, I said. It is a very big old house. He nodded. We were in the kitchen where it was light and warm. I put down my magazine onto the kitchen table. What kind of story would you like me to tell you? Well, he said thoughtfully, I don't think it should be too scary. Because then, when I go up to bed, I will just be thinking about the monsters the whole time. But if it isn't just a little bit scary, then I won't be interested, and you make up scary stories, don't you? I know she says that's what you do. She exaggerates. I write stories, yes. Nothing that's really been published yet, though. And I write lots of different kinds of stories. But you do write scary stories. Yes. The boy looked up at me from the shadows by the door, where he was waiting. Do you know any stories about Clack the Rattlebag? I don't think so. Those are the best stories. Do they tell them at your school? He shrugged. Sometimes. What's a Clack Rattlebag story? He was a precocious child and was unimpressed by his sister's boyfriend's ignorance. You could see it on his face. Everybody knows them. I don't, I said, trying not to smile. He looked at me as if he were trying to decide whether or not I was pulling his leg. He said, I think maybe you should take me up to my bedroom and then you could tell me a story before I go to sleep. But probably it should be a not so scary story because I'll be up in my bedroom then, and it's actually a bit dark up there too. I said, shall I leave a note for your sister telling her where we are? You can, but you'll hear when they get back. The front door is very slammy. We walked out of the warm and cozy kitchen into the hallway of the big house, where it was chilly and drafty and dark. I flicked the light switch, but the hall remained dark. The bulb's gone, the boy said. That always happens. Our eyes adjusted to the shadows. The moon was almost full, and blue-white moonlight shone in through the high windows on the staircase down into the hall. We'll be all right, I said. Yeah, said the boy soberly. I am very glad you are here, though. He seemed less precocious now. His hand found mine, and he held on to my fingers comfortably and trustingly, as if he'd known me all his life. I felt responsible and adult. I did not know if the feeling I had for his sister, who was my girlfriend, was love. Not yet. But I liked that the child treated me as one of the family. I felt like his big brother, and I stood taller. And if there was something unsettling about this old empty house, I wouldn't have admitted it for words. The stairs creaked beneath the threadbare stair carpet. Click-clacks, said the boy, are the best monsters ever. Are they from television? I don't think so. I don't think any people know where they come from. Mostly, they come from the dark. Good place for a monster to come. Yeah. We walked along the upper corridor into the shadows, moving from patch of moonlight to patch of moonlight. It really was a big house. I wished I had brought a flashlight. They come from the dark, said the boy, holding on to my hand. I think probably they're made of dark. And then they come in when you don't pay attention. That's when they come in, and then they take you back to their, not a nest. What's a word that's like nest but not? House. No, it's not a house. Lair? He was silent, and then, I think that's the word, yes, lair. He squeezed my hand and stopped talking. Right. So they take the people who don't pay attention back to their lair. What do you do then, your monsters? Do they suck all the blood out of you like vampires? He snorted. Vampires don't suck all the blood out of you. They only drink a little bit. Just to keep them going and, flying around. Click-clacks are much scarier than vampires. I'm not scared of vampires, I said. Me neither. I'm not scared of vampires either. Do you want to know what a click-clack does? They drink you, said the boy. Like a Coke? Coke is very bad for you, said the boy. If you put a tooth in Coke in the morning, it will be dissolved into nothing. That's how bad Coke is for you, and why you must always clean your teeth every night. I'd heard the Coke story as a boy, and had been told as an adult that it wasn't true, but was certain that a lie which promoted dental hygiene was a good lie, and I let it pass. Click-clacks drink you, said the boy. First they bite you, and then go all is she inside. And all your meat and all your brains and everything except your bones and your skin turns into a wet milkshakey stuff, and then the click-clacks suck it out through the holes where your eyes used to be. That's disgusting, I told him. Did you make that up? We'd reached the last flight of stairs, all the way into the big house. No. I can't believe you kids make up stuff like that. You didn't ask me about the rattlebag, he said. Right, what's the rattlebag? Well, he said sagely, soberly, a small voice from the darkness beside me. Once you're just bones and skin, they hang you up on a hook and you rattle in the wind. So what do these click-clacks look like? Even as I asked him, I wished I could take the question back and leave it unasked. I thought huge, spidery creatures, like the ones in the shower this morning. I'm afraid of spiders. I was relieved when the boy said, they look like what you aren't expecting. What you aren't paying attention to. We were climbing wooden steps now. I held onto the railing on my left, held his hand with my right as he walked beside me. It smelled like dust and old wood. That high in the house, The boy's tread was certain, even though the moonlight was scarce. "Do you know what story you're going to tell me to put me to bed?" he asked. "Like I said, it doesn't actually have to be scary." "Not really." "Maybe you could tell me about this evening. Tell me what you did." "That won't make much of a story for you. My girlfriend just moved into a new place on the very edge of town. She inherited it from an aunt or someone. It's very big and very old. I'm going to spend my first night with her tonight. So I've been waiting for an hour or so for her and her housemates to come back with the wines and Indian takeaway." "See?" said the boy. There was that precocious amusement again. "But all kids can be insufferable sometimes, when they think they know something you don't. It's probably good for them. You know all that, but you don't think. You just let the brain fill in the gaps." He pushed open the door to the attic room. It was perfectly dark now, but the opening door disrupted the air. I heard things rattling gently, like the dry bones in thin bags, in the slight wind. Click-clack, click-clack, just like that. I would have pulled away then if I could, but small, firm fingers pulled me forward unrelentingly into the dark. The end. Well, I hope tonight when you go to bed, you pay attention to the things in the dark. Thanks for joining us. Bye.